it is starting to impact your mental health, it is starting to impact you as a person, then this is for you. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you strategies to help you cope with your situation and strategies that help you exit. Because I know this is scary, but when you are in any type of bad relationship, the best move is to leave. Now, it's not always convenient or easy to leave, especially if you don't have anything lined up. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. And I'm not suggesting in any way for anyone to feel like they must leave, but you need to take steps to leave because nothing's going to change. So let's talk about this. What do I know about toxic bosses? Yeah, I've had multiple toxic bosses throughout the years. In my 15 years of the corporate world, I probably had more than 3 toxic bosses. The last one was terrible. The last one, he would scream at me. He would say things to me like, "You're a princess." Um, Whenever I needed basically to take time off for lunch, everyone needs a lunch break, he would want to schedule a status meeting with me on a weekly basis in order to update him on what I'm doing. As someone who's in a leadership role, I mean, that's much. And we were literally together in every single meeting, yet he still wanted that lunch break with me because he wanted to control and he was going through a lot of insecurity. He felt good about doing those type of things. And that was quite toxic. Another toxic boss that I had was a micromanager, and he would rewrite all of my documents, even when the developers felt that I was giving them clear and sufficient information to build their features. And I just felt like I couldn't do anything about it. The worst thing that he did was he gave me an ultimatum that if I didn't relocate after I just purchased my condo, that he would fire me. And so that's the level of toxicity that I'm talking about. Now, here's what happens when you are in a toxic environment, and especially if you are reporting into a very toxic boss. You start doubting yourself. You start blaming yourself because you start questioning whether the problem is you, but it's not. The thing is, when you have someone toxic, maybe even narcissistic, you start doubting your own basically reality. You start thinking like, is it me? Like, did I really make a mistake? That's how bad a toxic boss can be. They make you doubt your capability. They make you doubt what you bring to the table. I worked with a client who was laid off after being at an organization for many years. I will say more than 15 years. She was in the same organization. She climbed up the ladder. She was at the director level and she got laid off. While she was in the work environment, she was constantly battling with leaders who were quite toxic, who didn't acknowledge her work, who made her question her performance. And so after she got laid off, we started working together. And I could see the amount of imposter syndrome that she had. It made it very challenging for her to believe in herself. And when you're job searching, you're already carrying that baggage from like a toxic boss who already chipped away at your self esteem. it actually makes you even more vulnerable to rejections, which are quite normal in the job search process, because not every job that you apply to, A, is going to be the right fit, and B, they're going to see your value. And so when you come out of a toxic environment, it actually makes your job search even harder than the average person, because you are still recovering from the impact on your confidence. I see that even more prominently in women, the impact, but I also see it in my male clients. Toxic situations can really exasperate your imposter syndrome and make you doubt your abilities, even though it wasn't your fault. And it's just because that person that you were reporting into had their own issues, their insecurities, and they took them out on you. So, studies on psychological safety and burnout show that safer work environments can weaken the negative relationship between work environment stressors and burnout. So, the environment absolutely matters. Confidence is not just an individual trait, it's also shaped by whether the environment in your organization rewards honesty, transparency, risk taking. So, when a lot of people come to me and they say to me, I don't know if I should go for that level. I don't know if I should go for that role. I don't know if I should take a risk. The job market is bad. A lot of that, rightfully so, a huge contribution to that is because they've had a negative experience in the past where they've been in environments that cause that self doubt. I see this day in and day out in the thousands of clients that I worked with, people who have had positive experiences in the workplace. They aim higher if they are deciding to pivot or navigate new opportunities. And people who have suffered from toxic situations tend to lower their standards and doubt themselves because of what they went through. And so it is a very dangerous impact on professionals. And so if you are experiencing a toxic situation and you're wondering why your confidence has been hit, well, this is why. I want you to think of it almost like being in a bad relationship or in a toxic relationship with a partner who constantly criticizes you, constantly puts you down, constantly argues with everything that you say. Of course, once you get out of that relationship, or even while you're in that relationship, you start thinking that you can't do any better. You can't find someone who's better. You're not as attractive. You're not a desirable person, because that person has been poisoning the way that you see yourself. So I want you to take that in for a minute. And if you feel that way right now, I just want you to collect that as another piece of evidence as to why you should leave. Okay, the other thing I wanted to say, when it comes to resilience and bouncing back from a toxic situation, it's not about just being stronger. It's actually about being able to recover your self trust, being able to rebuild community, being able to have that ability to actually connect with other people. I will give you an example of a client that I worked with. Um, this client again went through a toxic situation, but senior leadership that didn't trust him, minimized the work that he did. The person that he was reporting into didn't have his back, didn't advocate for him. And so when he was looking for roles, it was very difficult for him to actually see the positive aspects of organizations. It's almost like when you go through something toxic, you see everything not in rose colored glasses, but you see everything in dark colored glasses. You almost start walking on eggshells, and every job posting that you look at triggers you. Anything around you need to be flexible, all of a sudden you start seeing that as, oh my God, they're going to make me work around the clock, even though, the job postings are generic, and when they're written, there isn't a lot of thought into them. But because you've been through that toxic, situation, it's almost like it creates PTSD for you. It's, again, if I were to use the relationship analogy, it's like going through a breakup and thinking that all men, all women out there are terrible and you should never trust anyone. You should never be in a relationship because everyone is out there to get you. And that's what a toxic environment does to you. So let's talk a little bit about how to solve this, because I don't want to just, validate what you're going through. I also want to give you some solutions. Practical tip number one: I had a client who shared with me that she was criticized by a toxic boss during a one on one. And something I said to her is to try to separate basically what this person is saying to her from herself. The thing is, in the workplace, we're dealing with human beings. And the thing that we need to understand about human beings is that they have their own insecurities and triggers. And so the thing that you want to separate when you have a toxic boss who's directing their issues at you is you want to ask yourself, if someone else was in your shoes, would they act that way? Because toxic feedback often comes wrapped in a lot of emotional noise. Maybe that person is going through a lot of pressure from above. Now, this does not excuse their behavior, but thinking about all of those things depersonalize it for you so that you don't come into these conversations and one-on-ones feeling like what they're saying to you is necessarily true, but it's actually coming from a different place. It's coming from the fact that they're under pressure. Maybe there's a lot of layoffs at the organization right now. They may have their way of basically directing this anger at you is their way of protecting themselves, and it's not necessarily about you. And what you want to do, instead of internalizing that feedback, is not to necessarily argue with them, but to ask them clarification questions. Like, okay, if they say to you, I need you to do this thing, okay, well, how do you want me to do it? Right? Try to separate the emotion from what they're saying to you and get to the objective pieces of their feedback without fueling their anger or disagreeing with them and saying to them, well, I didn't do this, why are you talking to me this way? Because all that's going to do is it's going to escalate the conflict and make your life miserable. The thing that you want to think about is you're not there to repair the relationship. You already know this person is toxic. I almost want you to think of it like a tired nurse at a hospital. Like when you've seen that nurse and you have these patients like screaming at her, or like someone who's screaming at her, and that nurse doesn't even argue with the person. She just gives them the answer that they're looking for or directs them elsewhere, right? That's what you need to do. Because again, you're not there to repair the relationship. Whenever there's conflict, you need to think about whether you want to repair the relationship or not, or whether you want to diffuse the conflict to get to what you need. And the latter is what you need to think about. Because if your intentions is to leave the organization, then give that give that person what they need and don't try to repair it in a way that makes you feel better, because you're not going to get validation from that person. So that's one tip that I want to give you. Questions that you can ask the person, such as, what is, one concrete behavior that I can actually act on? What is, give me an example of what you like me to do differently. Try to get them to be very specific and simply move on. Okay, here's another practical tip that I'd like to share. I call it building your cookie jar or your evidence jar. Something that I like doing is I like to document and collect proof of my own value, so that if I have a difficult boss who pretty much lashes out on me, I find ways to validate my own emotions, that where I'm not asking them for validation. I'm looking at other sources of validation, because I already know that I will never get that validation from that person. And it also proves that what this person is saying about me and my performance is not true. And so, what I recommend that you do is go through all of the positive emails that you've gotten from stakeholders in the organization, thank you notes from team members. Go through the wins that you've created, projects that you move forward, problems that you solved, metrics that you improved, moments where people trusted your judgment, screenshots of recognition, performance reviews, examples of impact. Put them all in one document. And whenever you're having a bad day with that person, literally just go through it as a reminder. It seems silly, but our brain sometimes needs that reminder in order for us to disconnect from that noise and that person. I personally do this because, regardless of whether you own a business or you work in an organization, we all have these bad days. And what I love doing is going into my community for my clients, where they actually have, I have like a channel that says share your wins. And I read it. I read every single one of the wins. And that just instantly makes me feel amazing. And so I know this works. And I would highly recommend that you do this whenever you're having that difficult conversation with your boss and you're having a bad day. The thing about your cookie jar or your evidence jar is that there's a lot of research on resilience that emphasizes connection, wellness, healthy thinking, and meaning as core resilience building practices, which supports this idea that you need external anchors when stress starts distorting your self perception. So, the evidence or cookie jar, I call it cookie jar because I love cookies. That's how I get my reward. Um, the cookie jar helps you remember that this person may not see me clearly, but that does not mean that I have no value. Okay, so that's the purpose of the cookie jar. And from a psychological perspective, this is why it is helpful. Now, if you've been watching so far, I'd love it if you comment in the chat if these tips have been helpful, because first of all, it's so weird for me to just talk to a camera without seeing people. I love to get, a live audience here participating with me. So if you want to get more tips, then please comment, or even tell me which of these tips has been useful so far. Tip number 1, dissociating from the conflict and not confronting your boss, but and depersonalizing it, and simply just asking them specific questions on what they need without arguing with their feedback or looking for validation. Tip number 2 is your cookie jar, where you go through all of your wins, thank you notes from team members, things that you've done well, conversations that uplift you that you have in writing, and just putting them all in one place. So tell me, tip number one or tip number two is your favorite so far? Put that in the comments. You can just put in one or two if you like, just so that I get some feedback. Okay, now I'm going to move on to tip number three. Do not make career decisions from the wound. What I mean by that is when you are exhausted and, and you're so fed up with your boss, what's the first thing that you're going to do? You're going to go on LinkedIn and you're going to hit the easy apply button. Don't tell me that you've never done that. I'm sure there's at least one person who's done that. I've done that. Whenever things are bad, I would just go on LinkedIn, search for jobs, hit the easy button. But here's the thing. That's almost the same thing as, coming out of a breakup and right away going on a date. You need to heal from the situation and you need to do a little bit of self-reflection so that you don't repeat the same cycle. In fact, I often get clients, we get on a conversation and it almost seems like they're creating this self-fulfilling prophecy where they're going from one bad situation to a similar bad situation to another bad situation. And that is because they haven't taken the time to heal and they haven't taken the time to self-reflect and try to understand why they ended up at this organization in the first place and how they can prevent that from happening again. One of my clients worked at Uber and she dealt with a very toxic situation. And the smart thing that she did was not to just go and apply for jobs. The smart thing that she did is she came to me, we worked together, we went through all of her career experiences and projects, and we even did an exercise where we started writing down all of the qualities that she would want in her future boss. You need to process what happened. Look, there is therapy, which I don't do, and it is useful. And then there's also self-reflection that is specific to your career. Unfortunately, not all therapists are well equipped in terms of guiding you to make career decisions or pulling insights in terms of what happened from a career perspective. And what you want to do is find, an executive career coach that you can sit down to that does the similar exercise that I do with my clients, where we go into all of the moments in your career, good and bad. We discuss them, we try to understand them so that A, you make peace with what happened, B, you learn things about yourself that will help you realize why these situations keep happening to you. Okay? So, from the sense of do not make career decisions from the wound, is I really encourage you to start thinking to don't start thinking things like I'll just take something lower stress, or I don't care about title anymore, I'll just take a pay cut if it means I can breathe, I just need out. Look, I understand that, but relief is not the same thing as alignment, because deciding to just take a pay cut just so that you can leave, I mean, that could be a temporary thing, but you want to be careful that it doesn't become the entire solution and a long-term thing. Because again, all that's going to do is maybe it's going to give you relief from that toxic boss, but it's also going to build resentment around yourself that you actually lowered your standard because of that person and decided to take on a lower paying job. Right? And you don't want that to happen. You also don't want to let one bad apple to stall your career and create a setback for your career. Because I'll tell you something, when you take a step down and then you try to take a step up, I mean, I help my clients with that, but it's also a lot of work for you. So you want to be careful, okay? Because that will impact also how recruiters perceive you. It will impact what happens when you go out there and look for other opportunities. They'll start asking you questions. Well, how come you took a step down? What happened that caused you to take a step down? Right? So you want to avoid that, and I recommend that you reach out to me before you do that. Or if you already did that, reach out to me as well so that we can manage the situation. Okay, let us talk about, well, before I move on, anyone found tip number 3 helpful in terms of being careful about, you know, not letting that situation to push you to take any job? If you found that helpful, type 3 for me, please. Okay, now I want to talk about tip number 4. Regulate before you strategize. If you just had a brutal one-on-one with a toxic boss, don't immediately rewrite your resume. Don't apply to 20 jobs. Don't immediately decide that you're not qualified because your nervous system is activated. That means that your brain is scanning for danger, not opportunity. Like I mentioned, before, when you're in that state, it can create some form of PTSD. And everything that you start seeing out there in terms of opportunities, you'll start to look for flaws in them because your nervous system is trying to protect you. But the danger may not even be real. But because you're overly sensitive from what happened, that's what's going on. What I want you to do instead, in the moment when you are dealing with a toxic boss and you're having a bad day, I want you to self-regulate. What I mean by that, again, it feels logical, it sounds silly, but I have to remind people because we're all humans, and this is why I'm here as a coach. When we're overwhelmed, we can't think about all these things. And so I'm giving you this framework so that you have steps that you can take. Okay. So, what I recommend that you do is when you are in the thick of it and having a bad day with that toxic boss, I want you to do something kind for yourself. I want you to go take a walk, get out of the work environment, talk to someone who sees you clearly. Maybe you have an ally at the organization that you're close to. Go and have a coffee with them. Move your body, do something nice. For me, like whenever I'm stressed, like I go to a specific spa or I go for a massage. So, self-care is extremely important because work stress is linked to rumination, and research suggests that self-compassion can help you become more resilient, and it can reduce stress, rumination, and depressive symptoms. So, no, self care is not fluffy. It is part of you stepping out of the situation so that you can make a strong decision versus making decisions from a place where you're overwhelmed. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Number 3, I almost made that decision earlier this week. I will not lower my standards again ever, though I'm currently in a toxic situation. I'm very sorry that you're going through a toxic situation. That is not fun. Okay. Tip number 5. Tip number 5 is about borrowing confidence from the right room. One of the most powerful things that I've seen in my program is what happens when someone from a toxic environment enters a healthier room. What I pride myself is that I am really great at creating a strong community of like-minded, ambitious leaders who support each other. I I don't allow toxic people in my program. I spend time talking to every person who comes to my program, seeing if we're the right fit and ensuring that their values align with mine. And if their values align with mine, that means they're going to get along with the rest of the community. And what I've seen is quite transformational in my program where I've had people who have gone through toxic environments. And because they are in a supportive environment of peers, you know, like things shift for them. Because when you're in a toxic environment, you start losing trust in people. You start losing trust that there are environments with good people. And when you see that there are actually environments with good people, professionals, who share your values and mindset, it gives you hope that those organizations exist, because if those people exist, then those organizations exist. So that's what I want you to think about, is surrounding yourself with people who are positive and who understand what you've gone through. Because again, if you try to get that support from your family, from your spouse, from your friends, they won't get it because they're not in that toxic situation, or they are happy maybe in their jobs, and they're not going to be as understanding as people who are actually in that situation. And so that's why it is very powerful to be in a great community. Social support is one of the most important buffers when people are navigating stress and adversity. And resilience is not just individual toughness, it's also supported by connection and meaning. Again, this is why I tell people you can fiddle around with ChatGPT and talk to it while you're looking for a job, or you can be part of a program with like-minded leaders that you can talk to, that you can interact with, that you can collaborate with, and that on its own is going to lower your stress levels. Okay, so who found tip number 5 helpful? Type that for me in the chat if you found it helpful. Now I want to move on to tip number 6. I want you to turn "I'm being managed out" into a strategy question. Sometimes your performance reviews are fine, but the one-on-ones make you feel like you're constantly being criticized, which is confusing. I don't know if you guys have ever had a boss where they put you on a pedestal one day and then the next day they make you feel terrible about yourself. I had a boss who made me feel that way. I could never predict when his next tantrum is going to happen. And it really made me walk on eggshells. And so, again, I would, what I would do, is I would document everything that is going on with you and your boss. Try to move the conversation into writing. After you have a meeting with that person, summarize what comes out of it. Make sure that in your summary you're documenting what they have asked you to do, so that they are not using this as a weapon against you, or making it sound like you were not cooperative, that you were insubordinating them, or any of that. Remove the emotion from your email, make it very factual. For example, if they lashed out on you and said this document that you submitted is terrible, ask them a question. Okay, thank you for your feedback. Can you be specific about what you want me to change? And then in the email, summarize. Hey, whatever your boss's name is, based on our conversation, this is what we agreed on. This is the feedback I got. These are the steps that I'm taking. That way they don't try to gaslight you later on, or make it sound like you were not receptive to feedback, or you refused to follow whatever they were asking you to do. Again, let me know if tip number 6 is helpful, because that will also help me understand which ones, I can elaborate on in my content too. Okay, now the last tip number 7. Reposition before you re-enter the market. This is the part that most leaders and directors skip. They leave a toxic environment, but they don't update their positioning. So they go into the market still sounding depleted. They over-explain, they apologize, they ramble, they talk too much about what happened, and they undersell their scope. They struggle to explain what they want next, and then they wonder why the market is not responding. This is why you need to reposition before you start applying everywhere, okay? So, I'll tell you guys a story of one of my clients who was a VP of marketing. She came out of a very toxic environment, and while we were working together, like, she was in tears all the time. And she ended up quitting because she could not take it anymore. Of course, I advised her to go on a little mini vacation, and then she came back to the coaching. And it was so weird because when she was still in the toxic environment, the way she actually said to me, I feel like I didn't do anything in my role. I feel like I didn't achieve anything. And then when she came back and I asked her these powerful questions, I gave her a little bit of homework with self-care and all of that good stuff. She came back and she said to me that she was actually part of a huge merger and acquisition that she led. And she was able to take a product to market that actually opened doors to a partnership with another organization that brought in like millions of dollars in revenue. And I just like almost fell off my chair. And I said, but like, this is crazy. And you were telling me that you didn't really do much in your career. And that's what happens when you're in a toxic environment. It almost like your brain goes blank because you've been in survival mode for so long that you don't realize the impact of what you've delivered. And this is why it's important to work with a coach who is going to understand the emotional challenges of what you've gone through, help you overcome them, and also ask you the right questions so that you realize the impact of the work that you've done. Okay? So when we say repositioning, we talk about how you build your brand in such a way that the right organizations with the values that align with yours find you. The mistake that people make is that when they are applying for jobs or rebranding because they want to get a better opportunity, coming out of a toxic environment, it's almost like you're using the same brand that got you to that toxic company, and then you wonder why you're not getting anything better. And so we need to like completely shift things. We need to like rebuild the entire thing, and we need to do a lot of that self-reflection work in order to ensure that you have this new amazing identity that will only bring in higher caliber organizations and organizations that align with your value. Okay, so this is the work that I do with my clients. I help senior professionals and directors who have outgrown their current environment stop making career decisions from burnout, fear, or under recognition. We don't just ask, what job title do you want next? We look at the deeper patterns. What kind of work brings out your best? What environments have distorted your confidence? What are you under positioning yourself? Or where are you under positioning yourself? Are you sounding more like an individual contributor, or are you sounding like a leader? And sometimes we have trouble actually owning what we've done in leadership roles, and we hide behind our team because of the negative feedback that we've gotten from a toxic boss. Other questions that we work on is, what stories prove your actual value? What role direction would allow you to be recognized, challenged, and paid properly? Because a toxic boss can make you forget what you've actually done. And my job is to help you see it again, not in a fluffy way, in a strategic way. We look at the evidence in your career. We look at all the stories, all of the projects that you've delivered. We extract the pattern. We figure out what your strengths are and what your unique approach is. We clarify your career sweet spot. Then we turn that into positioning stories, resume language, LinkedIn language, and interview answers. that make the market understand your level. Because if you are a director operating above your title, but you've been stuck under a boss who keeps diminishing you, you don't need to set yourself back for your next move. We need to rebuild your confidence and reposition yourself for the level that you actually belong at. So, if you are a director or senior leader under a toxic boss and you know you need to leave and you want someone who partners with you, not just give you tips, but actually partners with you because you understand that it's emotional and you don't want to do this alone, then my door is definitely open. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at what's working, what's blocking you, what needs to change so that you can move towards a better fit role. So if you want, you can book a career diagnosis with me. And yes, we are definitely going to look at what's working, what's blocking you, and what needs to change so that you can land in a better fit role in a better environment. So how you do that is very simple. I'm going to share my screen. And let me show you how that works. So if you go into my LinkedIn profile, and you will find under the heading, book an appointment. So let me show you this. Share screen, window, book an appointment. Okay. So here, if you scroll to this part, click on book an appointment, and it's going to take you to my page where you can book a call with me. All you need to do is click on book your career diagnosis. These questions takes 2 minutes to fill out so that I can understand the context, what your goals are, since this is only a 15-minute call. And then it'll take you to my calendar. All right, friends? Now, if you found this absolutely useful and you got a lot of great tips for your situation, I'm sure there's someone out there who is not in a good situation and who could benefit. So do me a favor. Please, at least at a minimum, like this post so that the algorithm knows that this is helpful and can push it out to people who need help, right? And if you have a friend who's going through something, then what you can do is copy and paste the link. So usually what you can do is on the LinkedIn Live itself, you can actually copy and paste. So I'll show you how you can do that, or you can share it with someone. So I'll show you how you can do that. Let me see if I can do this. So if you go into my profile, you'll see this post, and all you need to do is click on this, copy the link to the post, and send it as a DM to someone who is going through a tough time. That way they can benefit from this and they don't feel alone. Okay. Thank you so much, friends. I hope that you found this very useful. If you also, don't feel comfortable commenting, then you can also DM me and let me know about your situation. I've always loved to help. People always send me DMs. I love it. It's great feedback for me. And also, like, I can at least give you some quick, pointers and support so that you know how to handle your situation. All right. I hope you have a wonderful Thursday and a great weekend.